You hear the splash first. Not loud, just the soft break of water in the darkness, somewhere beyond the torchlight. Then voices, low and urgent, followed by the unmistakable sound of an emperor weeping. You're standing on the banks of the Nile, and the most powerful man in the world has just lost the only person he ever truly loved. But this isn't a story about a wife or a daughter. This is about a boy, a beautiful Greek teenager whose body now drifts somewhere in the sacred river. And what happens next will shock an empire that thought it had seen everything. I'd love to know. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching this from. It absolutely amazes me that a tragedy from nearly 2,000 years ago can reach screens across every continent, connecting us through curiosity about the strangest corners of human history. The year is 130 CE. The emperor is Hadrian, ruler of the greatest empire the world has ever known, and the boy's name is Antinous. Within weeks, Hadrian will do something no Roman emperor has ever dared. He will declare a male lover divine, building cities and temples in his honor, minting coins with his face, and creating a religious cult that will spread from Egypt to Britain. But to understand why this act was both revolutionary and profoundly tragic, you first need to understand what love, sex, and power actually meant in ancient Rome, because nothing was what it seems. Forget everything you think you know about Roman marriage. Erase the romantic fantasies. In the world of patrician Rome, the wedding bed was not a sanctuary of affection. It was a corporate merger. Marriage existed for three cold, calculated purposes: to combine family fortunes, to forge political alliances between powerful clans, and to produce legitimate heirs who would carry forward a dynasty. Love was not just irrelevant. It was almost suspect, a dangerous emotion that might cloud strategic judgment. This transactional system had a curious consequence. Fidelity, as we understand it, simply didn't exist for Roman husbands of status. Affairs were not shameful secrets whispered in corridors. They were expected, normalized, and conducted openly. A powerful man might keep mistresses, visit courtesans, engage in relationships with slaves, and maintain long-term arrangements outside his marriage without raising a single eyebrow among his peers. Part of this was practical. It protected wives from the deadly dangers of constant childbirth in an era without contraception. But it also created a parallel world of desire that operated on entirely different rules, especially when those desires involved other men. Here's what you must grasp to understand Roman sexuality. They had no concept of sexual identity as we know it. There were no words for gay or straight in their vocabulary. Instead, every intimate act was viewed through a single lens: power. Who dominated? Who submitted? In every encounter, someone was the penetrator, the active agent, the one who imposed their will. Someone else was the receiver, the passive participant, the one who yielded. In relationships between men and women, the roles were predetermined by biology and society. The man was dominant, reinforcing his masculine authority with every act. But when two men were involved, the equation became treacherous. One of them had to assume the submissive role, a position Roman society viewed as inherently feminine, weak, and shameful. For a free-born Roman citizen to willingly take that role was a catastrophic loss of masculine honor. It was an abdication of everything that made him a man in their eyes. Yet there was an exception, a narrow window of acceptable behavior. The relationship between an older, powerful man, the Erastes, and an adolescent boy, the Eromenos, was often tolerated, even admired. This was pederasty, framed as mentorship. The boy gained education, social connections, and political patronage from his benefactor. He, older man, gained beauty, companionship, and the satisfaction of molding a protege. It was transactional, built on profound power imbalance, where desire became currency for advancement. and everyone understood it would end when the boy matured and took his place as a citizen. Against this backdrop of calculated relationships and rigid hierarchy, what happened between Hadrian and Antinous was extraordinary. Hadrian was married to Vibia Sabina, a woman from a powerful family. Historical sources suggest he showed her almost no affection. Some accounts claim their marriage was never even consummated. Hadrian's desires lay elsewhere, directed primarily toward men. But among all his companions, one captured him completely. Antinous was a Greek youth of reportedly stunning beauty and sharp intelligence, probably around 13 or 14 when he first entered Hadrian's orbit. What began as perhaps a conventional patron-youth relationship evolved into something Rome rarely witnessed: genuine, consuming love. Hadrian didn't just use the boy and discard him. He educated him extensively, made him a constant travel companion across the empire, and, by all accounts, devoted himself to Antinous with an intensity that bewildered his contemporaries. For years, they were inseparable. Hadrian, an emperor known for his restless intellect and obsessive touring of his vast domain, brought Antinous everywhere. The boy wasn't hidden away in a palace. He was displayed, honored, treated almost as a consort. Then came October of 130 CE and the trip to Egypt. The details of what happened on the Nile remain one of history's most haunting mysteries. Ancient sources report only that Antinous drowned. Some suggest it was an accident, a fall from a boat in darkness. Others whisper of suicide, claiming the youth sacrificed himself based on some prophecy that his death would extend Hadrian's life. More sinister theories propose murder, perhaps by jealous courtiers who resented the boy's influence. We will never know the truth. What we do know is the aftermath. Hadrian's grief shattered every convention of imperial dignity. This was an emperor who had commanded legions, rebuilt the Pantheon, and constructed a wall across Britain to mark the edge of civilization. Yet, when news of Antinous' death reached him, he reportedly wept openly, uncontrollably in front of his entire court, and then he did something unprecedented. At the exact spot on the Nile where Antinous died, Hadrian founded an entire city, Antinopolis. Not a small memorial or a shrine, but a fully planned Roman city with temples, theaters, and administrative buildings. He ordered coins minted across the empire bearing Antinous' face, an honor previously reserved for members of the imperial family and gods. Statues of the beautiful youth began appearing in every province, more numerous than those of any figure except the emperor himself. But Hadrian went further still. He declared Antinous a god. Not metaphorically, not as poetry, literally divine. He established religious cults dedicated to worshiping the deified boy, with priests, rituals, and sacred games held in his honor. Within a generation, the cult of Antinous spread from Egypt to Greece, from Asia Minor to Gaul. Sailors prayed to him for safe voyages. Mystery religions incorporated him into their rites. He became, for a time, one of the most widely worshipped deities in the Roman world. This was revolutionary. Romans deified their emperors, yes, but after death, as political necessity. They did not deify teenage boys, and certainly not male lovers. Hadrian's grief was so immense, so overwhelming, that he literally tore open the boundary between mortal and divine to ensure Antinous would exist forever. In a culture where relationships were disposable and transactional, Hadrian loved so deeply that he remade heaven itself. Where Hadrian defied conventions with the depth of his devotion, another emperor shattered them with brazen spectacle. Nero, who ruled about 70 years before Hadrian, took an entirely different approach to his male relationships. He turned them into public theater. Other emperors kept their male favorites in the background, maintained discretion, preserved the appearance of conventional dominance. Nero dragged his desires onto the grandest stage imaginable. He staged not one but 2 formal wedding ceremonies with men, complete with traditional Roman rituals. The first was with a former slave named Pythagoras. but in a move that horrified the Roman elite. Nero himself played the bride. He wore the wedding veil, the flammeum, and publicly took the submissive feminine role in the ceremony. This wasn't a private arrangement. It was a calculated piece of political theater designed to provoke. For the emperor, the living embodiment of Roman masculine power, the supreme father figure of the state, to publicly cast himself as a bride was an unthinkable inversion of cosmic order. Later, perhaps recognizing he'd pushed too far, Nero married another young man named Sporus. This time, Nero took the conventional role of groom. But what he did to Sporus was far worse than any theatrical gesture. To ensure that no one could question his masculine dominance in the relationship, Nero ordered the boy castrated. Let that sink in. This wasn't medical necessity or voluntary religious devotion. This was forced mutilation performed to solidify an image. By permanently and violently altering Sporus's body, Nero was making a public declaration. I am the man here. I am in control. Sporus was no longer a partner. He became a prop, an object reshaped to fit his master's performance of power. The act reveals the darkest truth about Roman power dynamics. Sporus's agony was irrelevant. His physical integrity, his bodily autonomy, his future, none of it mattered. He was a slave, and slaves were property. Nero's authority over his body was absolute. This was the system's cruelty laid bare. The same culture that could produce Hadrian's transcendent love also enabled this casual, bureaucratic brutality. After Nero's death, Sporus's fate grew darker still. He passed to another emperor, Otho, and then to Vitellius, who reportedly planned to have him publicly raped during gladiatorial games as entertainment. Facing this final degradation, Sporus took his own life. He was maybe 19 years old. In a society obsessed with masculine dominance, the most effective weapon against a rival wasn't military defeat or financial ruin. It was sexual slander. If you wanted to destroy a man's reputation, you didn't just accuse him of corruption or incompetence. You accused him of willingly taking the submissive role with another man. The allegation alone, true or not, could cripple a political career. Even Julius Caesar, the great general and dictator, was haunted by rumors from his youth. His enemies spread whispers that he had been the passive partner in a relationship with King Nicomedes of Bithynia. Whether this was true or fabricated propaganda, the rumors stuck. Soldiers reportedly chanted crude verses about it during his triumphal processions, mocking their victorious commander by questioning his manhood. This tactic reached its zenith with perhaps history's most infamous allegation, that Nero committed incest with his own mother, Agrippina. Roman historians like Suetonius and Tacitus recorded the claim that Agrippina, desperate to maintain control over her son after engineering his rise to emperor, initiated a sexual relationship with him. Some versions claim she appeared before him in her litter, provocatively dressed. Others suggest Nero made advances and she encouraged them. Modern historians almost universally regard this as vicious character assassination, posthumous propaganda designed to paint Nero as the ultimate monster. It combined the worst possible violations: incest, the ultimate taboo, and the suggestion that Nero submitted to his mother's domination. Whether the public believed it literally or not, the story served its purpose, cementing Nero's legacy as a tyrant so morally bankrupt that no depravity was beyond him. But if Nero's alleged sins played out in public spectacle, another emperor's horrors unfolded in terrifying privacy. Tiberius, who ruled in the early 1st century CE, grew increasingly reclusive as he aged, eventually withdrawing from Rome almost entirely. He retreated to his villas, particularly on the idyllic island of Capri, surrounded by the glittering Mediterranean. What happened in those villas became the stuff of Roman nightmare. Ancient sources, particularly Suetonius, describe a place transformed from paradise into a hunting ground. Tiberius had young boys brought to the island, officially servants, but their true purpose was to satisfy the emperor's sexual desires. Suetonius paints a grotesque picture: rooms decorated with pornographic art, children trained to swim between the emperor's legs while he bathed, elaborate scenarios of abuse conducted far from any witnesses who might report back to Rome. It's true that Roman historians sometimes exaggerated for dramatic effect, painting their subjects as either saints or demons with little middle ground. Some of the more lurid details about Tiberius may be embellished, but the sheer volume and consistency of the accusations, from multiple sources recorded during and shortly after his reign, suggest a foundation of terrible truth. Even if only a fraction of the reports were accurate, Tiberius stands as one of history's most sexually corrupt rulers, a man whose absolute power curdled into monstrous predation. His villas weren't homes. They were islands of horror, where those with no power were consumed by one who had all of it. In all these stories of powerful men, Hadrian, Nero, Tiberius, it's easy to lose sight of the others. The boys and young men whose names we rarely know, whose perspectives were never recorded, whose lives were not their own. What was it like to be them? For Antinous, beloved of Hadrian, it might have meant experiencing genuine affection alongside unimaginable privilege, education, travel, proximity to the center of world power. But it also meant living in a gilded cage, unable to refuse, unable to leave, knowing that your entire existence depended on the continued favor of one man. When he died, whether by accident or despair or darker causes, he was still a teenager. For Sporus, it meant being surgically mutilated to satisfy an emperor's vanity, then passed from master to master like furniture, until the only escape was death. For the nameless boys on Tiberius's island, it meant something worse: being trapped in a beautiful place with a man who held absolute power of life and death over you, with no witnesses, no rescue, no hope of justice. They were elevated above their station, yet had no agency. They could be showered with gifts one moment and discarded, or worse, the next. They existed in a paradox: visible yet voiceless, desired yet dehumanized. Their hopes, fears, and suffering were erased by the powerful men who used them. This brings us to the central paradox. How could Roman society be relatively accepting of same-sex relationships while simultaneously enabling such horrific systemic abuse? The answer lies in their rigid social hierarchy and their definition of who counted as fully human. The rules of honor, dignity, and consent applied fully to freeborn Roman citizens of status. Their masculinity had to be protected. Their honor was sacred. But the vast majority of people in the empire, slaves, foreigners, servants, the poor, were not considered human in the same way. They were property or near property. They had no legal rights, no honor to defend, and no recourse against their masters. Therefore, sexually exploiting a slave boy was not, in the Roman mind, a contradiction of their values. It was an expression of them, a master exercising his rightful dominion over his property. The system wasn't hypocritical from their perspective. It was perfectly consistent. Power determined everything, including who deserved protection and who existed only to serve. This brutal logic explains how the same culture produced both the divine love story of Hadrian and Antinous and the predatory nightmare of Tiberius's Capri. It was never a culture of universal acceptance or enlightened tolerance. It was a culture where acceptance and humanity were privileges reserved only for the powerful. The Roman Empire has long since crumbled to dust. Its forums are ruins, its aqueducts broken, its language transformed beyond recognition. But the echoes of these stories remain, preserved in marble statues, ancient coins, and the unflinching accounts of historians who refuse to look away. The hundreds of surviving statues of Antinous, more than for almost any other figure from antiquity, stand as monuments to a love that transcended death. They show a youth of haunting beauty, sometimes depicted as Dionysus, sometimes as Osiris, sometimes simply as himself. Museums across the world house these images: the British Museum, the Louvre, the Vatican. Each one is a reminder that Hadrian's grief was so powerful that it literally reshaped the divine landscape of an empire. Sporus left nothing behind but a few paragraphs in histories written by men who viewed him as a curiosity or a joke. His voice is silent. His perspective is lost. He exists only as an object in someone else's story. The boys of Capri left even less, just the accusations recorded by historians and the ruins of villas where tourists now take photographs against stunning coastal views, oblivious to the horrors those walls once contained. These stories of emperors and their lovers are not merely scandalous historical footnotes or material for shock-value documentaries. They are mirrors reflecting a timeless and uncomfortable truth about human nature, that the line between love and ownership, between desire and domination, has always been terrifyingly thin. They show us that absolute power is humanity's most dangerous aphrodisiac, a force that can build monuments to a beloved god or create a private island of monsters. The tragedy of the male concubine in ancient Rome was this. His suffering was invisible, his personhood negotiable, his body currency in games of power he never chose to play. While Rome watched, its citizens, its senate, its historians, they recorded the spectacle, debated the propriety, and preserved the details for us to examine 2,000 years later. But they almost never asked what he felt, what he wanted, or what he might have chosen if choice had been possible. Beneath the Mediterranean lie fragments of empire. In the Nile's silt, traces of a boy loved into myth. Between cruelty and devotion stretches the human condition, what power unleashes when unchecked. Rome witnessed it, preserved it, and still we cannot look away.